has been well over 2 years since Attack on Titan's final chapter released, and to this day, people are still debating over whether this was the finale the series deserved or had been building up to all this time. Now, it genuinely surprises me that the fanbase seems so split on the ending because in my opinion it should not even be controversial. Forget chapter 139, AOT's rumbling arc as a whole goes against everything the series had been building up to over its 12-year-long journey. Calling this video a critique would imply I have some positive things to say about the ending. I don't. So take this video as more of an analysis of the arc and its characters. The video is split up into these sections which have been separated by timestamps if you want to skip to a particular part. In the earliest arcs like Trust, even a group of minus titans were a threat unless you were a Titan Shifter or an Ackerman. There was this feeling that even amongst the core cast, no one was safe, which sort of gave the series its reputation back when the anime was first airing. No arc does this better than Return to Shiganshina. Just 4 shifters were enough to take out almost all the scouts and forced our main cast into picking who they wanted to save. Battles like this is what gave the arcs their stakes and showed just how powerless the scouts were against the titans. In the Battle of Heaven and Earth, however, the scouts were forced to battle against hundreds of Beast Titans, hundreds of Warhammer Titans, hundreds of Jaws Titans. You get the point. The Alliance, by the way, comprised of 5 shifters, one of whom got tongued and incapacitated until the end, 2 regular dudes, a cripple, an actual strong fighter, and a child. And what were the casualties from this? Levi broke his leg, which happened in Season 1 against Annie anyway. The only point where all the cast felt as if they were in any real danger was in Chapter 138 when all the Eldians became minus titans, which happened after all the previous shifters weren't involved anymore, and that was only because the hallucinogen decided to start fighting. The means by which the Alliance actually wins this battle is even worse. Armin is somehow transported into the paths and manages to convince Zeek that there is value to life, and conveniently all the plot relevant shifters of the past heard this and decided to join their cause. Out of all the characters, Zeek is the one who should be the least likely to be convinced by appreciating the little things. He has spent the entire series believing that the best thing that could have happened to you was to never be born. Natalism versus antinatalism is one of the biggest themes in Attack on Titan, and Zeek was the primary representation of the latter. It does not matter if thematically it makes sense for Zeek to eventually be challenged and change his way of thinking. This is something that I believe was also going to happen. What matters is how poorly executed it was. The first issue I have with this exchange is the fact that Zeek has been sitting on these beliefs in the paths. We know that time does not work in the paths the same as it does in the real world. In the instance when Eren and Zeek made contact in the real world, enough time had passed for Zeek to grow his hair and nails out. So ever since the rumbling began, how long has Zeek been sitting here with these thoughts and just watching the rumbling play out? Months? Years? This kind of near instantaneous change in worldview from such a minor interaction is the kind of thing you'd expect from the worst parts of a series like Naruto, but Zeek is not anywhere near as bad as Kruger, Grisha and Freckles Ymir. It makes zero sense for any of these characters to wish to help the Alliance. Kruger worked his entire life as a double agent, killing his own people and casually Marley's because he believed in doing what was necessary for the best of Eldia. Even though Eren was killing Eldians outside of Paradise, by the time all of these shifters got involved, most Eldians outside of the walls were already killed. And the way the scene is presented to us suggests that he is in line with the Alliance's ideology, which goes completely against everything we've seen of his character prior. Grisha is an even stranger case. Although being against Eren when he was pleading for Zeek to stop him, he still decided to give him the Titan powers. Zeek even pointed out how there was something Eren must have showed Grisha which made him change his mind and give him his powers, something the audience never finds out about. And although Ymir did sympathize for the warriors, that does not mean she was on their side. She only left Historia because after finding out Eren was the coordinate, she believed that maybe life could continue inside the walls. Helping the Alliance means putting Historia's and the island's lives in danger, which is something she would normally never do. One theory is that this was all staged by Eren since the shifters have the slave eyes which characters like Ymir possess. They were not actually in control but puppeted to help the Alliance and make them heroes. This explanation makes sense, but it's a massive headcanon which we can't just assume to be correct. Plot armor will always be present in a story or else the main characters would just die within the first chapter, but when compared to the rest of the series, the amount given to the Alliance does not let you suspend your disbelief. Out of every character I'll be talking about, none were treated anywhere nearly as poorly as Eren. Eren Yeager was retconned. That's a big claim to make, but there is no doubt in my mind about that. We find out at the start of chapter 139 that Eren's true plan was to wipe out 80% of humanity and have the Alliance stop him so that they can look like saviors and become ambassadors for peace. Out of all characters, Eren coming up with this plan makes no sense. Back during the Trust arc, Pixis brings up the idea of coming together to fight a common enemy, and then Eren calls him out on it. He knows that this isn't any sort of permanent solution, and that even if there was a common enemy, the idea is too hopeful and humanity by the end would still not be united. Then, during the Uprising arc, Armin suggests a plan to frame the government, then the scouts will be able to come in as saviors and trick the masses onto their side. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The rest of the cast, including Eren, look at him like, what the fuck, Armin? And we get this silly face. Although this isn't exactly the same as what happened in 139, it is still another instance of Isayama making a joke out of the idea of the scouts posing as saviors to win the trust of others. And it is the second time that Eren has shown disapproval for one of the main parts of his own plan. AOT is not a nihilistic story and it shows throughout. Mikasa was about to give up her life but then got back up after realizing that if she dies, so do all the memories she had with Eren. Erwin directly challenges it and instead of running to the basement by himself, chooses to honor the lives of those who fell before him and give their sacrifices meaning. And despite my problems with it, Armin's conversation with Zeek was to convince him that life does have value. There's so many other examples, but no other character showed this desire to persevere more than Eren. At almost every point in the series when Eren is facing death, he continues to reach out his hand and cling for life, because if he does not fight, then what purpose was there in him being born? Every time we were asked the question, who's the real enemy, the obvious answer was the continents of the outside world. But at a much deeper level, the enemy is the world which has forced our cast to fight for their freedom and prove that their lives have purpose. Where characters like Zeek, Fritz or Frieda constantly enforce their nihilism upon others with their inherent greater power, Eren rejects it. Even fucking Onyankopon believed in this. That's part of what made Eren so compelling. He has always been driven by his ambitions and his desire for freedom because he believed it's his right from birth. Chapters titled Roar and Scream are both instances where while the characters around him considered just dying, Eren lashed out at the world and kept on pushing. When Reiner begged him to give up, or when he broke the chains and paths, his scream was the rawest demonstration of his will to live. So why is it that throughout the entire rumbling arc, Eren goes to sleep? He no longer has any of that conviction in him, and when asked why he did the rumbling, he says, I don't know. This is not the character we have been shown for 138 chapters. We know why he's doing this. He made his intentions clear in chapter 130. He tells Historia that he doesn't want to sacrifice her and continue the cycle of children eating their parents, and he believes that the only way to end this cycle of hatred towards his island is to destroy all life outside of it. This can't just be a facade either, because Eren is thinking about all of this and says he'll kill them in his own thoughts. And then in chapter 131, even though he knows letting Paradis get wiped out would result in less deaths, he refuses to sacrifice his own people. This is the biggest problem with anyone who says that Eren faked everything since the time skip. You can't just lie and fake your identity in your own head. It's not as if Eren realized, oh shit, the reader's looking at me, it's time to go back into my edgy Eren persona and make up fake thoughts to misdirect them. Others might say that Eren really did think like this, but then after the paths messed with his head, he lost his motivation and goals, which is like, okay, that's not any better. It just removes Eren's agency, which is what he's been fighting to protect the entire series. I see people constantly bringing up Kenny's one line about how everyone is a slave to something, and then they say Eren was a slave to freedom. Even after writing this script, I had to come back to edit this section because Eren says it himself in the latest trailer. Kenny says that everyone needs to have some sort of motivation or desire in their life to keep on moving, but in pursuing that dream, depending on how unattainable it is, you may end up losing yourself, which is exactly what happened to him. Eren's desires, however, are actually attainable because he has the power to achieve it, he just chose not to, and it's not some lofty goal which has no end like power or wealth. The problem with this claim is that freedom isn't Eren's motivation in 139. To be a slave to freedom means that Eren has to be pursuing it. It should be as if it's a part of him that he can't let go of, and for most of the series, this is exactly what it looks like. Eren, since he was a child, always had this innate desire in him for freedom, but here, freedom isn't what's on his mind right now. He does everything because he feels like it's supposed to happen. This is not some deterministic timeline where Eren saw the future and is forced to abide by it against his will. In chapter 130, he stated that even if this was all set in stone, it is because he wanted it. Rather than it being Eren following fate, fate follows Eren's desires. When he speaks to Falco, he says that most people are forced into hell because of their circumstances, against their own free will. But there are those few who willingly push themselves into it. They are the ones who control themselves. Eren was among those people, but now for whatever reason, he loses his own agency and follows what Ymir wanted. He no longer has the desire to protect his people or be free. 139 makes it seem as if Eren was born and always destined to be Ymir's slave. And because of this random panel between him and Grisha is meaningless. I don't see why this is here other than the fact Isayama claimed it would be the final panel and he's forced to put it in somewhere now. Also, just as a side note, being a slave to freedom does not mean you're a psychopath who'll kill others just to satisfy your dreams from a book. I'll come back to this later. The fact Eren chose to believe in his friends makes no sense either. Back in the female Titan arc, he chose to trust his allies and it got the Levi squad killed. This is juxtaposed with the time he chose to believe in himself in the cave and ended up saving everyone. Then, throughout all of the time skip, even though he knew the scouts would support him, he kept his friends in the dark and pursued his own desires. Every time they attempted to talk to him, all he said was that there was no need to talk. None of them were able to give him an alternative that would guarantee the island's safety, and even after forming the alliance, they still didn't have any idea on how to establish peace once the rumbling was over. The only two people Eren showed any actual trust post-timeskip in were Historia and Flock, but the former ended up contributing nothing to the story, and the latter he just lied to despite considering him a friend. Yes, Eren saw Flock as a friend, he's right here on this page, there's no contesting it. Despite the scouts' clear inability and his physical frustration towards them, he still chose to trust them in the end for some reason, and what happened? Paradise got destroyed. Some people claim that Eren never cared about the island and that he only wanted to protect his friend so that they could live long happy lives. This is a terrible, baseless argument which I need to debunk. Again, Eren in his own head says how he's willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of Paradise. While breaking down to Ramsey, who doesn't even understand what he's saying since they speak different languages, he says the rumblings for the sake of the island. And he previously refused to let future generations take the burden of the conflict. Eren may have said that he wants his friends to live long happy lives, but his desires do not reflect reality or what he believes is necessary. This exact same page reminds us that Sasha died because of Eren, and so does Hanji the very next chapter. He even tells Armin in 139 that he wasn't sure if his friend would survive or not, so where is this argument even coming from? And if it really was just his friends who mattered, why does that not extend to their children or the ones who come after? To explain how inconsistent or meaningless his actions were, some people claim that Eren is just a psychopath and interpret this scene as him saying that the very fact people exist outside the world disappointed him, and that he wished for all of it to be wiped away so that it could satisfy the fantasy he had from Armin's book. Even though Eren has always been a bit fucked in the head, this is a gross misunderstanding of Eren's character and is just wrong. In the SNK character directory, Isayama makes it clear that while Armin always wanted to see the sea, Eren never really cared about visiting all these places in Armin's books. Rather, he believed that they existed and just wanted to know that he had the right from birth to go see them, that he was allowed to go see them if he wanted to without the fear of oppression. Living freely without the fear of it being taken away from him has always been Eren's #1 motivation, and it's why as he grows up he almost completely forgot about the book. Then in a 2020 interview, Isayama said that what also disappointed Eren was just how hostile the world was. Yes, I'm sure he must have been a bit disappointed to know that there wasn't that sense of discovery that Armin promoted, but the core of Eren's sadness was the realization that the world which he originally wanted to explore only wishes to exterminate his people, not boo-hoo, people exist at all. Historia was one of the most important characters throughout most of AOT. Because of her royal blood, she has a lot of significance in the world by default, and she's effectively a secondary protagonist in the Uprising arc and arguably the Clash of the Titans arc. However, after becoming pregnant through this unnamed farmer character, she is almost entirely sidelined. Everything surrounding her pregnancy was constantly shrouded in mystery, from her motivations, the time of conception, and if this farmer even was the real father. It is brought up repeatedly throughout the series, and we are even shown her giving birth as late as 135 as if to remind the audience that this plotline still exists. But by the end, there was no payoff and none of these valid questions and contradictions posed by the characters meant anything. I shouldn't have to say this, but to some people this is the only part of the story that they actually care about. I do not care who Eren decides to smash. I care about the story being well written and having sufficient payoff to what has been built up. The very first time we see her, Historia does not even look happy around the farmer. All we're told is that he threw stones at her as a kid, then eventually grew up to work at the farm, so he basically isn't even a character. The MP suspects she became pregnant to postpone having to be turned into a Titan and eating Zeek, but this can't be true since she was always protected through the rumbling, which she knew about. From the moment she was born, Historia was forced to live behind the fence of her grandparents' farm. Her only means of learning about the outside world was through a book someone else showed her. She didn't allow herself to continue the cycle of people killing each other to inherit the founder for the sake of saving the world. Every scene between Eren and Historia complements the other. After Ymir died, the first one who saw her for who she really was Eren, and it was those words that created the doubt in her mind. Then she rejects the expectations the world has on her and becomes a quote-unquote enemy of humanity, something which we know clearly stuck with Eren through his actions and what he says to her in 130. Chapter 107, Visitor. Historia is willing to inherit the Beastlander's power for the 50-year plan. Although this is an act of selflessness, it goes completely against what she learned in the cave scene and not to do things for the greater good. Eren is the one who opposes this, once again proving he is the only one who truly has her best interest in mind. Hanji even took notice of this and knew Eren would never sacrifice her of all people. She then proceeds to provoke him by calling his actions reckless and questioning how much he actually cares for her, and this is the moment Eren actually starts giving her full proper responses and starts challenging her. This is the very chapter that ended with the reveal of Historia's pregnancy, by the way. Visitor also parallels chapter 89, Meeting. Eren is stuck in a cell, he's talking to himself, Hanji questions him about it, Hanji provokes him. The MPs and scouts all sit around and talk about the future of the island. Eren chooses to be silent about Dinah because he isn't ready to sacrifice Historia, but this time the chapter ends with Kruger warning Grisha that if he doesn't love someone inside the walls, then he'll repeat the same mistakes and the cycle will never be broken. These words do not only apply to Grisha, as Kruger states someone later on may see them. And we know after Grisha, Eren is the only attack titan left, he's the last one. And then, chapter 130, where Eren could not trust his friends enough to tell them about the rumbling, he told Historia everything. She is the queen. She has the most power on the island and could have told anyone but chose not to. Eren was willing to work with her to oppose the MPs and by proxy his friends just to keep Historia safe. Once again, at a time where she would allow herself to become a lamb for slaughter, Eren refuses. In Attack on Titan, to save someone can be seen as a representation of love. Niccolo said that Sasha saved him. Falco wants to inherit the Armored Titan to save Gabi. And these two moments. You get the point. What's important here is the wording. In chapter 123, Eren used the keyword Tusker, which is closer to helping and doesn't have much depth beyond that. It is the same word he used when talking about how Falco helped him. Niccolo, however, uses this word, which is much more significant and expresses a deep gratitude. It actually means to save. There's also the fact that he actually loved Sasha. This is the exact same word Eren used when he said how Historia saved him. We then cut back to the past where Zeek tells Eren that this Ackerman bond theory of his is wrong and that Mikasa just likes him that much. And even after asking what he's going to do with that information, does he open up? No. His mind goes back to Historia asking her completely platonic bestie Eren, what would you think of me having a child? Juxtaposing this moment of Zeek asking for Eren's opinion on Mikasa with these moments between Eren and Historia feels very intentional. Seriously, just look at the structure of this page. The parallels between his conversation with Mikasa and his conversation with Historia are much more noticeable in the anime since they put the two scenes within the same episode. Now, the time frame of this entire scene is important too. In Japan, a pregnancy is considered to last 10 months. 10 months ago is exactly when the railroad opened and Eren had this conversation with Historia. We know she's been pregnant for 10 months since we see her giving birth in 135, and yet she lies to everyone about when she got pregnant. All of the MPs and scouts believes she's months away from delivering. This couldn't have been to postpone when she'd have to eat Zeek, as she was protected through the rumbling, which she knew about. So if the farmer really is the father, what point was there in lying? There is no reason to lie about the date other than most likely trying to hide the fact that Eren is the father. Shortly after the railroad opened, Eren abandoned the scouts and lived in Mali. If they all believe that she got pregnant several months later when Eren was gone, then he's not under any suspicion. This isn't some stupid red herring. If Historia's pregnancy had no relevance and the farmer really was the father, we didn't need all these wasted pages of characters speculating the true circumstances of her pregnancy. Neither did we need any of these contradicting facts. All it did was worsen the series' overall quality. The fake King Fritz is a red herring. Rod's story of Grisha is a red herring. If you make a red herring, there must be a substantial payoff. It should not serve to just waste the audience's time, especially when by the end it meant nothing. The audience are supposed to believe that the farmer really is the father at first, and then all the hints and contradictions in the story are supposed to lead us to the truth, not reaffirm what the cast has already said. Mikasa's entire character is dependent on her obsession with Eren. Not just love, obsession. The story constantly reminded us that what she saw was an idealized version of Eren. Her feelings were not genuine to who he really was, but the fantasy she chose to live in. The first instance we see of this is during their training corps days when Eren passed the ODM test. Eren saw this as a statement to Mikasa that he doesn't need her to protect him anymore, and that he's capable by himself. Something which we see annoys him several times. Mikasa, however, saw it as him saying that he doesn't have to leave her anymore, and all of the characters around her rightfully look at her like, what is this girl waffling about? While Eren clearly did care about Mikasa, her relationship with Eren was supposed to parallel her relationship with Louise. Louise was Mikasa's Mikasa, a girl who dedicated her entire life to someone with greater responsibilities beyond them. And by the end, Mikasa never gave Louise the closure she wanted. When Eren attacked Mali, Mikasa immediately bought the story that Eren was being controlled by Zeek because his actions didn't fit the person she had in her mind. And whenever Eren was acting depressed, not acting the same way as everyone around him, she chose to ignore it. In fact, the entirety of chapter 123 was Mikasa realizing she misunderstood who Eren was. That question, what am I to you, was not Eren hoping for Mikasa to confess her love for him. It was Eren once again knowing what was going to happen but begging for something to change. He knew he'd save Ramsey, knew what Mikasa's answer would be, and knew that the scouts would find him. Even in this dream or ideal world of hers and paths, her Eren gave up on freedom and didn't move forward with his own goals. Her Eren would rather abandon his friends and his people just so he can live a quiet life where he can fuck his sister not sister. That's what Mikasa saw of Eren, and ironically enough, even in this dream or world, Eren looks unsatisfied. This moment in chapter 50 wasn't supposed to be a romantic scene or a sign that Eren actually likes Mikasa. Mikasa had already accepted her death and was pouring her heart out to Eren. To kiss Mikasa or reciprocate her feelings here would be for Eren to admit defeat, which is just what the cabin Eren does, but it's not what manga Eren does. The scarf promise was not some romantic binding that he'll forever be Mikasa's. It was a promise to her and to himself that he will live and refuses to die there. The only thing Mikasa ever had going for her was Eren. There was a plotline set up with the Azuma beetle that went nowhere, and in the extra pages, the only thing we see from Mikasa is that she keeps visiting Eren's grave, even bringing the entire family tree along. The whole series, we don't know Mikasa as a character. We don't know her opinions on freedom, her opinions of Paradise, the people around her, the world after the rumbling. We don't know anything about her unless it's about Eren. Any romantic feelings from Eren lacks foreshadowing, and foreshadowing should not be a substitute for development anyway. The story constantly challenged and criticized her perception of Eren, seemingly trying to prove her wrong. But now, all of Mikasa's delusions about Eren have been validated. Eren's only wish was to always be with Mikasa, and everything he did was because he was being controlled or didn't know why. Within 3 chapters, the scarf and this tree suddenly became the most important things in AOT. Also, she kissed his severed head, which I actually originally forgot to include in the script. Like, come on man, where's this? Like, why did Isayama include Ymir smiling here? What? Why did Mikasa not have a reaction upon realizing that, oh shit, I kissed her head? For the last 2,000 years, Ymir has been waiting for someone to free her. Eren is the only person to ever tell her that she's neither a god nor a devil and she can decide for herself what she wants. Earlier within the same chapter, Fritz said that slaves don't need both eyes, and so hers were always obscured whenever we saw her. The first instance we ever saw them was at this moment when for the first time she disobeyed someone with royal blood. She chose to help Eren, and Armin even points out how she must also want to do the rumbling. So then why does the story flip itself into telling us that Ymir was actually waiting for Mikasa all this time? As late as chapter 135, we see that Ymir actually did let the pigs out. She has always sought freedom just like Eren. Putting wings behind Mikasa doesn't mean she's a better symbol of freedom than Eren. We also find out that Ymir actually loved Fritz the entire time. In chapter 122, we see her take the spear for King Fritz but choose not to regenerate. She was perfectly capable of surviving this but would rather let herself die than continue living. And then the chapter ends with this cathartic panel of her rage after all she's been through. She sided with Eren here, the man who rejected everything Fritz stood for. Fritz, the same guy who cut out her eyes, maybe killed her parents, enslaved her, used her to conquer the world, forced her into having kids, and then had those kids eat her corpse. This is not Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome requires the victim to have some sort of bond with the abuser, but all the story did was show us just how much she hated her life with Fritz. This is a terrible representation of an abusive relationship, and no one should be trying to defend this. And then you have all these other dickheads who say, well, if she didn't love him, why'd she stick around? Well, She stuck around with Fritz the entire time because of her lack of self-worth, living her whole life accustomed to being a slave, and having nowhere else to go even if she did decide to turn on the Eldian Empire. The only reason I can think of for why we had this retcon was because Isayama knew there were no connections between her and Mikasa. The same way Mikasa was held down by her love for Eren, Isayama had to make Ymir held down by her love for Fritz in a desperate attempt to make the sudden connection make any sense, to give the two some parallels. And why Mikasa of all people? Eren makes sense since he's the last Attack Titan and founder. He actually managed to reach paths and see the truth. Mikasa is just some girl. You're telling me Ymir never found anyone else in this position for 2,000 years. Do you know who did have many parallels with Ymir though? Historia. Many that I just have to list out or else the video will be way longer than it already is. Both are shown running through a field of daisies with a close-up of blood falling on one of them. Both falling into a pit of water. The fact that they look similar as both children and adults. The fact that her best friend had the same name, pretended to be Ymir, and the consequences of it. Historia's entire childhood spent learning about Ymir, and Krista's entire personality being based on this false image of Ymir being a god that everyone loved. Historia refusing to be a god, and then Eren telling Ymir that she isn't one. Ymir being punished for opening a fence, and Historia for crossing one. Historia rejecting the cycle of children eating their parents, which started with Ymir. Historia choosing to fight for her freedom instead of being a slave and manipulated by someone else, in a way surpassing Ymir. Historia was the character who had so many explicit and implicit ties with Ymir the entire series, but just like her pregnancy, Isayama chose to forget about her. One of Eren's primary motivations was getting revenge against the Titans for the death of his mother. But then after the basement reveal, he finds out that the Titans were actually his own people who were being oppressed and marginalized in the outside world. There was no longer a monster Eren could blame anymore for what had happened to him. It was all the deliberate choice of people who had no reason to attack other than to quell their own fears and for imperialistic gain. So when he confronts Reiner, he asks him that question, why did my mother have to die? By this point, Eren understood that Reiner probably felt as if he had no choice and knew that he was a hypocrite by doing the exact same things Reiner did. But that doesn't mean he's forgiven. Eren is cold and sarcastic for most of their conversation, almost mocking him at times. There is still a clear part of him affected by his mother's death, and even Jean understood this in chapter 127. So then what's the point of all of this if it's implied in chapter 139 that Eren sent Dinah after his mum? If Eren knew he killed his mum before entering the path, then that just makes him worse, which, probably isn't the case. But then if he didn't, it just means that Isayama decided to mislead us and ruin such a heartbreaking line just to create a plot twist which no one even talks about. Why wasn't it Burrito's time to die there? Dinah could have shared her knowledge about the outside world. Paradis would have had a member of the royal family and the Colossal Titan on their side. If you changed some stuff around, or elaborated more, or explored how Eren actually felt about her, or have the two talk about this series-changing plot twist, I still think it'll be shit, but it's better than what we got, because Isayama didn't do anything, he just moved on. Some people say Eren did it to give himself the drive he needed to join the Scouts, but this wasn't necessary. Eren did not join the Scouts because his mum died. From the very start he always planned on joining because of his innate desire for freedom. Her death definitely affected him, but it wasn't some turning point in his goals. He was always going to join the Scouts. What makes this worse is that Carla was going to die here anyway. There was no way to lift the rubble off of her, so she was going to be killed by a Titan eventually. The only explanations you can make is a crazy series of headcanons like Bertotto needed to live to break down trust so that Eren could activate his powers, or Dinah needed to be the one to eat Carla so Eren would have this moment where he used the coordinate. These could be genuine reasons, but again, it's all headcanon. Eren doesn't know exactly why he did it, he just did it because it felt like he was supposed to. We didn't need this plot revelation either to explain why Dinah avoided Berthold. There was already a narrative explanation for why she went after the Jaeger household, and we could have just accepted that she was an abnormal Titan. There's so many points in the series where pure Titans don't behave how we expect them to, but neither us or the story expects an explanation. Of course, there was this memory shard which we know is foreshadowing now, but people who say that this plot revelation needed to happen to explain the shard are neglecting all these other shards that weren't explained. It's just so lazily handled and unnecessary. This isn't even comparable to when he manipulated and killed Grisha. If Eren didn't influence Grisha, then he would have been killed in the cave and he would have never received the attack or founding Titans. And then eventually, with the powers now resting in Frida, Paradis would get destroyed way sooner. Consider all of the times Carla was brought up in the final stretch of the series. Eren quotes a line about him being special because he was born into the world, the same words that took him out of his depression during the Uprising arc. Again, Jean defending Eren. Historia mentioning in 130 that the people killed by the rumbling would be innocent victims just like Eren's mum. At the end of the same chapter, us seeing Eren remember the anger he felt when his mum died. And then in chapter 131 when he saw a pregnant woman and started thinking what his mum would think of all this. All of these feel so disingenuous now because Eren is responsible for her death. There are even bigger series-breaking questions that this brings up. How was he able to control Dinah? Can Eren control any Titan throughout all history? How much can he control about them? Why doesn't he just make the Titans stand still and do nothing? I'm struggling to find the words to express how terribly this affects the series. Now anytime we see a pure Titan or a Titan of royal blood do anything, we have to think to ourselves, why didn't Eren just do this? The series up until the final chapter goes to great length to show us just how horrible the rumbling is, almost dedicating entire chapters to Eren's guilt and all the people he is killing. It also established that Armin was against the rumbling and that he would confront Eren and make him answer. But in 139, it's as if everyone from the main cast forgot. Eren mentions wiping out 80% of humanity, we get this brief expression of shock from Armin, but then we move on. He keeps on doing this. When it's revealed that Ymir loved for it, that Mikasa was the key to everything, that Eren didn't even know if he'd get them killed or not, or that Eren killed his own mum, there was barely any reaction. There is no pushback from Armin or any sort of ideological conflict that the series was known for. The most anger Armin shows is when Eren says he doesn't know what will happen to Mikasa after he's gone. Eren has killed billions of people, didn't know why he did it, put all of his friends in danger, and has put Paradis in a state of civil unrest. But the only thing that makes Armin snap is Eren seemingly neglecting Mikasa's feelings. I'm giggling and kicking my feet right now because I know you were all waiting for this, and so was I. This is the single worst page of Eren in all AOT. I've already explained why Eren having romantic feelings for Mikasa doesn't make sense, so the bulk of my analysis is already done. Eren, you killed billions of people, including your parents. Why is Mikasa on your mind right now? Why is she the topic of discussion and the one that caused you to snap when all this time you never had a passing thought of her because you were too busy being guilty over all these deaths? You can't just say he's only 19, he's displaying real human emotions. The main cast has never acted their age and the series never put any emphasis on this part of them. The theme of keeping children out of the forest applied to characters like Gabby or Falco who were 12. A series where the ages of the main cast is actually relevant is like, for example, My Hero Academia, where it's made apparent that it's an important part of these characters and the real world. Something AOT never did for the Scouts. This isn't even an AOT thing either. I would say most shonen series don't treat its characters or expect the audience to form an opinion of their characters by their real ages. Why is it that the only time people acknowledged Eren's age was when they had to justify this out-of-character breakdown? The issue is not that Eren is crying, the issue is why he's doing it. Previously, any time Eren has cried or screamed, it was over his own self-worth and grieving the death of others. Swearing he'll kill all the Titans, telling Historia he should have never been born, breaking down in front of Ramsey. These are all in character and help to elevate Eren. I really can't see how anyone defends this. Even reading the dialogue is so goofy, it sounds like a parody. No, I don't want that. Mikasa fighting another man. I wanted to think about me and no one else for the rest of my life. Even after I die, I want to be at the front of her mind for a while. 10 years at least. I would list Eren's primary objectives as ensuring Paradise's safety, breaking the cycle of revenge from the outside world, and breaking the cycle of his people being forced to eat each other. This one is basically getting rid of the Titan curse, but I want to focus on this aspect of it specifically. I am not going to argue about the ethics or morals of the rumbling. I am going to argue why knowing Eren, and knowing that this is what he wants to achieve, that anything other than 100% rumbling doesn't make sense for him to do. It's clear that the world hates Eldians in general, but as the series progresses, a lot of that hate starts shifting to the island specifically. In chapter 123, they were not advocating for the protection of all Eldians, but for all Eldians who weren't from the island. Then, during the declaration of war, Willy Tybur, an Eldian, repeats this exact same point. World leaders, nobles, and news reporters all clap and cheer as they place all their blame on the island. The scene speaks for itself. It is a declaration of war. From this point onwards, the world was ready to attack Paradise. The Eldians of the outside world share this sentiment as they see the Eldians of Paradise as traitors who abandon them. Now Eren is in the situation where all the people who are in power are getting ready to destroy the island. A full-scale invasion isn't even a year away, and it even surprised Eren to see Mali ready to attack so soon. The very next day they were able to form the Global Allied Fleet. Paradise's situation is not just a matter of hatred and racism either. Even if there were no Titans, the island contains Iceburst Stone, which is exactly why Hizuru even decided to ally themselves with the island. If it weren't for the Titan powers, the world may have been civil and tried to trade with the island, but because they have Titan powers and because everyone fears them, it just gives them more incentive to attack. Not only that, but nations such as Mali are realizing how the world is technologically surpassing the power of the Titans and that they need the power of the founder, essentially a god, to stay on top. In the 3 to 4 years since they went to the basement, he was practically begging in his mind for there to be another way. Having said that, let's go into all of these other options presented and why they would also fail in achieving Eren's objectives. A partial rumbling where Eren would destroy the militaries of all the other nations is essentially the manga ending, but worse. It does not matter what the percentage is. Activating the rumbling proves to the world that the island is a threat and that there will always be the threat of extinction for as long as they're left alive. All a partial rumbling would do is allow the world to bomb the island faster or force Eren to continuously threaten them with partial rumblings, and then before his 13 years are over, Historia or her child will be forced to inherit his powers, and then that child's descendants would have to continue eating each other. So that's not an option to Eren. Not to mention that the one who proposed this plan was Zeek, who secretly only cared about his euthanasia plan anyway. It was never supposed to actually work. There's also some parts of the fanbase who think Mali would have been enough, but again, wiping out a whole continent won't sit well with the rest of the world, and Udo has clearly stated that compared to the rest of the world, Mali is actually nicer with Eldians, and Eren has seen what nicer means. Isayama actually gives us an answer to all of this anyway. Despite only leaving 20% of humanity left, ruining the land, killing the livestock, and destroying most, if not all of the militaries, within what looks like a century of time, the world gets back up and carpet bombs the island. And this was after Paradise now had a massive technological and societal start after the rumbling. The extra pages are not some brilliant callback to the cycle of violence or how humanity will always be fighting amongst themselves. Eren never intended to completely remove violence from the world. He was trying to break the cycle of revenge that the outside world had for Paradise. Whether the island fought amongst themselves or not in the future isn't his primary objective, because in the present, it's the other continents that are threatening extinction. The problem is we followed Eren for 139 chapters, knowing he had the power to secure the safety of his people, believing he would pursue it after everything was shown of him, only for him to uncharacteristically give up in the end. If Eren's character didn't take a 180 and the Alliance just naturally beat him, it still would have been a bit dumb considering that he's basically a god, but it wouldn't be nearly as bad as what we got. And if Eren never had the power to do anything, or never showed the will to act, then this would have been a foreseeable outcome. And then in the final page, we see this boy Beren over here discover another Titan tree where Eren was buried, and it's heavily suggested that just like Ymir, he's gonna fall into this tree and restart the cycle of the Titan powers. After everything we have been through, Eren could not even create a world without Titans, the very first objective he had back in chapter 1. It was honestly as if Isayama saw his original ending and went, this? No, I can do worse. Annie has been trapped in a crystal since the female Titan arc. The cast do not know what kind of person she is or her true feelings on anything that she's done. The last time they met her, she led all those pure Titans towards the walls of Shiganshina, was directly part of Marco's murder, killed members of the scouts and decided to toy with their corpses, flinging this guy around like a yo-yo, killed the Levi squad, and was responsible for the deaths in Stoas. Some of this while having a sadistic smile on her face and saying that for the sake of her father, she'd do it again. Characters like Reiner or Boruto clearly regret their actions but are still punished for it by the story and its characters. Reiner becomes suicidal and is attacked by Jean over what happened to Marco, and Bero gets eaten alive. Annie does not have to regret what she's done. We can have a psychotic warrior. Someone like Zeek, for example, had ideals and believed in what he was doing, but was still very sadistic himself. But considering everything Annie has done, while not regretting it, how does Isayama handle her? We get this goofy scene of her eating pie, Connie makes fun of her, and then Armin tells him to stop being a meanie. Fans have been waiting years for Annie's return and for all the other characters' reaction to her. But here, Isayama is treating it like a reunion between friends and everyone completely ignores everything she's done. And then in chapter 132, we have everyone sympathizing for her again, and even people like Kama saying, Annie's done more than enough fighting. No! This is the same Connie who swore to make Zeke answer for what he did in Ragako and became so critical of Eren after he inadvertently got Sasha killed. But I guess he used up all his anger when he tried to kill Falco. Even someone like Levi, who has dedicated the rest of his life to hunting down Zeke and has his own existential crisis over it, doesn't say a word to Annie after the loss of his squad. We know that he's mad because he refuses to wave goodbye to her, but why is everyone's level of resentment so inconsistent? Oh, also Armin loves her despite barely speaking in their cadet years and not at all ever since Stoas. There has been almost zero foreshadowing before this and absolutely no plot development since the female Titan arc, which would lead us to believe that Armin developed these feelings, unless Eren's theory about Bird Turtle influencing his mind is true. But that's just headcanon, since we never got a concrete answer. This romance is not at all well written or sensical, and honestly, Armin's behavior towards Annie is very creepy and obsessive. Very short section, but during the War for Paradise arc, Shadis willingly took a beating from the Jaegerists, and then when those same students were about to get eaten by Titans, he chose to save them because despite what they did, they are still his students and he wishes to protect them. So then why in chapter 129 did he go around killing those same students and helping the Alliance? These two events are only a few days apart, so why has he suddenly stopped caring about any student who isn't part of the main cast? In fact, he was the one who advised his students to stay loyal to the Jaegerists for their own safety, but now he's killing them and he doesn't care because I guess they're not integral to the plot. Despite being the final and most high-stakes arc of the series, it can't even take itself seriously. Why are we having these out-of-place random moments of comedy during the rumbling? The most comedy AOT had before this point was in characters like Sasha or Connie, who basically existed for that purpose. But even they were restrained when the situation was supposed to be dire, and Sasha's death in its own way marked the end of this silly style of humour. This awful comedy and tone deafness is sprinkled across the arc. The Annie pie scene as mentioned earlier, Mikasa and Annie's talk about love, and this MCU level Okapi joke literally at the final battle, and more. It is incredibly out of place and was never so prevalent in any arc before it. In my opinion, the rumbling does not benefit from having lighthearted moments to act as a counterbalance to how dark the subject is. All it does is remove tension and create some extreme tone whiplash when compared to chapters like 130, 131 and 134. I can't be bothered to talk about this guy. When Armin was chosen instead of Erwin, he was given opportunities and we were given promises that it would be worth it. That Armin's continued presence in the story would provide more value than Erwin's, whether it be through actual contributions in the story or the quality of his own development. As a commander, Armin failed. There was never a point during the arc where he actually led the alliance, and by the time the battle started, he got tongued and taken out. Levi was the captain here. He suggested killing Zeek to stop the rumbling, which somehow worked, was calling the shots during the battle, and led the alliance on their final attack on Titan. That's not to say that Armin didn't do anything, but all he was a fighter, not a leader. Armin was always a strategist, just like Hanji, which I guess also explains why she failed as a commander too. Levi or even Jean, who has been explicitly said by Marco would have made a great leader, and who has proven this several times, should have been the commander. Jean even had this really serious one-to-one conversation with Hanji about their conflicting beliefs and how neither of them want to dishonor the scouts before them. He is the colossal titan and the scout's best strategist, yet he was ready to sacrifice himself to Connie's mom. I understand that he isn't in the best place of mind right now, but he came here with the objective of not only saving Falco, but to recruit people to join the alliance. So if he's gone, that's one less person fighting Eren and recruiting other alliance members, which is his current objective, so this train of thought just doesn't make sense. And also what, is he just gonna die and never say anything to Mikasa? Are the scouts just going to lose the colossal titan or have to recruit Connie's mom? Even beyond that, the execution's so sloppy and everything happens so fast, I don't care while watching this scene. Then, when all the Eldians have guns pointed towards them, Armin says, if we were titans, we would have transformed by now. As if that realistically wouldn't make the Marleyans more inclined to shoot them. Every time Armin is on screen after the Marley arc, he does some of the most corniest and stupidest things in the series. Many people who support the alliance were wary about the message it would send if Eren completed the rumbling, saying that it actually endorses genocide, which, depending on how it was executed, I disagree with. Every character, including Eren himself, detests his actions, and the story repeatedly shows us just how terrifying it is. Even the people of Paradise are drawn to look less human in their support of it. The rumbling does not have to be treated as a solution to the conflict, but rather a consequence. A cautionary tale about how if war continues to be relied on and goes unchecked, that there could be a time where diplomacy fails and desperation takes over. Now, where you stand on that is irrelevant, because ironically, the manga ending is actually pretty close to glorifying it. This page here is comical. I know that you're not supposed to take this line literally and Armin is just trying to comfort his dying friend, but there's two issues with that. The first is the intention matter the execution does. This is still a terrible piece of dialogue that wasn't worded properly. Throughout the entire time skip, Armin has believed in diplomacy and constantly disapproved of Eren's actions. There should not be any sympathy. He should not want to make Eren feel better about himself because there's nothing noble about it. The anger he had here for Mikasa's sake should have instead been put towards all the innocent people he killed with this plan that doesn't even guarantee Paradise's safety and had the potential of killing his friends. And the second issue is that all of the other characters treat Eren like a martyr. They think about him fondly and how much he had to sacrifice, as if this new revelation about his plan doesn't still fundamentally go against everything they were fighting for. He still committed genocide, he still let the Jaegerists take over, and he still risked the lives of everyone there. But now, even characters like Peak, who had nothing but a negative relationship with him, wish they could have got a chance to know him. Not every question in a story needs to be answered. Sometimes it can be left to interpretation, or the author trusts their audience to put the pieces together themselves, as much of a cop-out as that sometimes is. The problems begin when these questions either break the previously established canon, or have so much plot relevance given to them that by not resolving it, all you've done is waste time and bring the overall quality of the series down. 1. Why did killing Zeek stop the rumbling? In chapter 122, Eren freed Ymir, and for the first time ever, she rejected the wish of a royal family member. She wasn't following Eren's desires either, since Eren told her to choose for herself and Armin theorized she too wanted the rumbling. And then in chapter 133, Eren makes it clear that he is choosing to let the Alliance use their powers, so he's clearly in control of the Founder's powers. If that's the case, then why did Levi killing Zeek stop the rumbling? This is made even more confusing by how Eren is still able to transform into that colossal titan form, despite his link to the Founder seemingly being severed. Unless of course that was Ymir's doing, but then once again, that just means Eren and Ymir are in control, so why does stopping Zeek do anything? 2, and this is the biggest one, how did that cabin dream in 138 happen at all? It's already been established that the Ackerman clan and other minority groups such as the Orientals cannot have their memories altered by the Founder, which is why they were persecuted by the King of the Wolves. So then how did Eren erase Mikasa's memories? We don't know exactly, but most people believe that the dream in 138 was either memories implanted by Eren or a world he created in Paths. Neither of these work because in chapter 139, after Eren dies and the Alliance regain their memories of their last moments visiting him, she says, "You remember now too." Now too. Mikasa is admitting that her memories of Eren visiting her were also wiped, but this shouldn't be possible. And as an extension of this question, why and how is he experiencing this in the first chapter before he even has the attack or founding powers? Why didn't Eren dream about his time with all the other Alliance members? Why didn't they also have headaches all series? Of course you could say that, oh, it was all Ymir's doing, but once again, she's both an Ackerman and an Oriental. She has 2 times immunity. How has her mind been altered or erased in any way? And 3. What happened to the Hallucigenia? Last we saw of it, it was wrestling with Reiner, but after Mikasa kills Eren, it mysteriously disappears without any mention of it. The same goes for all the Colossal Titans that don't revert back to being humans after the curse was broken. To me, there is nothing redeemable about AOT's ending. Almost every character had a mediocre to terrible conclusion, all of the themes were abandoned, and by the end, nothing mattered. Even this one Levi panel that most people seem to like has become a joke after the result of the scouts dedicating their hearts ended in parodies getting destroyed. Isayama took every assumption the much more casual fanbase had about Eren and made them true. Eren loving Mikasa, Eren being a psycho, Eren wanting to unite the world. I still can't wrap my head around what went on in this final arc, especially the last 3 chapters. It goes against everything the story stood for, and honestly it feels like Isayama intentionally made the worst ending possible. In the span of 2 chapters, AOT went from a story about war, freedom, racism, other buzzwords, into a love story. Anyways, that's about it. Like, subscribe, give me your money. See you later.